All right, well, let's play this clip. This is the mayor of New Orleans addressing what happened.
To change just after 9/11. I remember a time when I could run from my car to the gate to catch a flight. After 9/11, we realized we need to do things very, very differently so that we can all arrive at our destination safely. I think you're going to see a lot of things change in the city of New Orleans. And actually, I think you're going to see a lot of things change in this country in terms of how we handle large-scale events, where there's pedestrian access and where vehicles are allowed. I think you're going to see things change in terms of the level of surveillance that we have in this country. We've pushed back against some of that, but when you look at places like the UK and other European places where CCTV is very commonplace and used proactively so that it can look for signs or indications of an attack, I think you're going to start seeing those things in this city because I'm going to be pushing for them, and you're going to probably see them in a lot of other places that are destination cities like the city of New Orleans.
I just feel angry. How do you feel?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there is, after events like this, there's a lot of kind of knee-jerk responses or knee-jerk reactions, right? Like, you guys remember, I don't know how old you guys are, but like in the early 90s or in the 80s, there were some instances where a relative poisoned a kid with Halloween candy, right? So it's someone who knew someone else doing it to them, right? Like, it was bad news. But then what happened afterwards is some towns got really spooked that strangers are doing this and that should kids really be trick-or-treating? Is the candy safe? And there were entire towns that said, we're not going to have trick-or-treating this year, right? We're not going to have our kids going out. So there were a bunch of parts of America where people were like, we're not going to trick-or-treat anymore. It was all over the news. Everyone was scared. And really, I don't think there were ever any incidents of dangerous, poisonous Halloween candy going out just from strangers. I think the closest thing, like I said, was I think there was some relative who did it on purpose to one of their relatives. But you know, the point is that knee-jerk reaction is a very American thing, right? And often it happens, I think, when people have a preconceived agenda, right? There's some people who wanted certain policies put in place regardless of what would have happened, and they see an event like this and they're saying, well, we have to do it. You know, some of the Trump administration officials, well, it's not, the administration isn't there yet, but the transition officials have already said, well, you know, these incidents prove we got to get tougher on the border. But what relationship do they even have to the border, right? I mean, I believe that the guy in Las Vegas and the guy in New Orleans, both Americans, they're born here. They serve in the military, right? Like they have the background of a kind of an all-American background, right? In terms of the suspects that we have. And yet there is no, there's no evidence or any relationship to the border whatsoever. And yet people who already have an agenda around the border are already talking about it. And then you just saw, you know, the clip from what you all played, people who have an agenda around wanting more surveillance, you know, more profiling, more, security have already put that into place. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have a reasonable conversation about how to respond to the incidents like this. But the knee-jerk reaction is a very, very strong pull in America always when these sort of things happen.
Yeah, it's terrifying because everybody now, and I always waver somewhere between powers that be taking advantage of it and powers that be creating it. I'm somewhere in there in a combination thereof. There's something very convenient about this. They're not addressing the fact, and I did hear something about that they had all their barricades or stockpiled over at the Dome because of the Super Bowl coming up. And so that they really didn't have adequate barricades on certain streets. So that could be one easier solution, but no, this will pose an opportunity to further create consent for things like cop cities all over the place, which are opening up, which is terrifying also. And this is just one more thing. And I also think it manufactures more consent against, it just perpetuates Islamophobia. I mean, it just, let's just throw that in there. That's what makes me feel like it's so created. But the other issue is it's something that not only manufactures consent for what's going on in places like Syria and Lebanon, but I feel like it's perfectly distracting from the Luigi Mangione case and people getting realizing universally that we have some issues here. and you started hearing people talking about this and CEOs getting nervous, and now all of a sudden there's a whole new villain and a whole new thing. And I don't know, I just find it all very convenient.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that there, like I said, was that old quote Rahm Emanuel used to use. He used this after a financial crisis. He's like, don't let a crisis go to waste, right? I think there's always people with preconceived agendas looking for events where they feel like they can push through whatever they want to do. You know, whether there's people doing strong immigration, surveillance, foreign policy, the border, so on and so forth. There's always going to be, I think, people looking to take advantage of events like this and incidents like this, even when, you know, let's be honest, in a country of 320 million people, with plenty of people who have unmet mental health needs, who have very easy access to firearms or explosives, there's always, unfortunately, going to be someone who has the capability to do this. You know, for instance, in the Las Vegas incident where a guy blew up his Cybertruck outside of a Trump, building and hotel, apparently he was a big Trump fan. You know, there was some reporting now, right? Like he actually really likes Trump. And like, why would he do that? Well, you know, there's certain people who have problems and their needs are unmet and they lose their minds. And I imagine it could have just been a very flamboyant suicide for him, right? Some very eye-catching, you know, the whole world is seeing that explosion. It may not be any more complicated than that. And yet when people see those incidents, they try to exploit them and say, well, you know, this proves why we have to do X, Y, and Z. And of course, those things that they want to do are things that we might be hesitant to do or resistant to do, right? And in the absence of those events. So, yeah, I mean, I think that is a constant kind of pull on the American people, pull in terms of these crisis events. But I will say one thing. I think because information is a little more democratized, country is a little more polarized, I don't know. I don't know if it'll work, right? Like, I don't know if kind of taking advantage of a crisis works as much as it used to. Just because people aren't quite necessarily all united on one team. They're not all united behind one flow of information, right? Like programs like this, people offer a different point of view about these events, right? And so I think it may find less success than some of these people expect.
Well, I do think that we are in a very unique period right now. And, you know, the whole thing about Mangione is that it kind of just opened up Pandora's box. And now a lot of people are looking at the system for what it really is, which is late stage capitalism. And you would think if we've gotten to this point, and it's pretty obvious that, you know, the powers that be are aware of, you know, just how restless the masses are, you would think that they would be at least somewhat cognizant of trying to change course. But not only are they not changing course, they are doubling and tripling down on the current course. I mean, I feel like things are going to come to a head if they're not already. I mean, who's to say if, you know, let's say this guy, I think his name was McLaughlin, or McHugh, Hughes, that did the job out in Vegas. You know, he's a big Trump supporter. But everything that's been going on for the past few days, particularly with Elon and Vivek and the statements that they've been making pertaining to the H-1B visas, and then really digging deep into what the intentions really are, which in many ways is just to line their pockets even deeper by, you know, bringing in people that are going to work for a certain amount of money, et cetera. And you kind of get like the whole MAGA movement really up in arms thinking, well, wait a minute, you know, I thought that you guys were, you know, coming to help us. I thought that we were going to change the economic philosophy in this country, that we were going to have a living wage in their terms. But it does seem to me that the entire system is kind of cratering in a lot of ways because there isn't anybody with a certain degree of power who is saying, all right, I think it's time we pull back. We have to recognize that we've maybe gone a little too far. Instead, they are going full steam ahead. And I think that's a very dangerous place to be right now.